Imagine walking home after a long day, only to have a gun shoved in your face, right outside your own front door. That's exactly what happened to Alicia Davis, a woman who appeared to be just another quiet neighbor. But what the man with the gun didn't know was that Alicia wasn't just any resident. She was an FBI tactical commander trained to handle life-or-death situations. And that night, he picked the absolute wrong person to threaten. It started like a scene straight out of a movie, except this wasn't Hollywood. This was real life. The sun had just set. The streetlights glowed faintly, and the quiet neighborhood seemed peaceful. Families were inside having dinner. Kids were finishing their homework. And nothing appeared out of the ordinary. But then, in an instant, the calm shattered. A woman stepped out of her car, carrying her work bag and keys in hand. She had just finished a long, exhausting day and was looking forward to nothing more than a quiet evening at home. She wasn't a celebrity, not someone who drew attention. To her neighbors, she was just another hardworking professional living in the community. Yet, without warning, her world flipped upside down. Out of the shadows, a man emerged. His steps were heavy, his eyes suspicious. And in his hands, something that instantly turned the moment into a nightmare. A gun, cold metal, pointed directly at her face. "Stop right there!" he barked, his voice sharp but trembling with insecurity. He wore a cheap neon vest with the word security stamped across it. To an outsider, he might have looked official. But to her trained eyes, it was clear. This man was no professional. He was an amateur, reckless, and far too eager to show power he didn't truly have. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, some even stepping out onto their porches, shocked at the sight unfolding in front of them. The so-called security officer of the homeowners association claimed he was protecting the community, but his actions screamed something else: fear, prejudice, and poor judgment. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the woman standing calmly before him was not the fragile victim he assumed her to be. She was far more powerful than he could ever imagine. Because beneath her calm demeanor, behind the ordinary exterior of a neighbor coming home from work, stood Commander Alicia Davis, an FBI tactical commander. She wasn't just trained in law enforcement. She had led missions that required precision, courage, and the ability to stay calm under unimaginable pressure. She had faced armed criminals, dismantled dangerous threats, and trained elite federal agents. And now here she was, facing down a shaky HOA security guard who thought he had the upper hand. What happened next would not only shock the entire neighborhood, but also leave a lasting lesson about respect, judgment, and what true authority really looks like. Her name was Commander Alicia Davis. To the outside world, she blended in effortlessly. She was the kind of neighbor who gave a polite smile at the mailbox, waved at kids playing on the street, and went about her business without ever drawing attention. To most, she seemed like an ordinary, hard-working woman who lived a quiet life. She didn't boast, she didn't gossip, and she didn't show off. She carried herself with calm dignity, respectful, private, and steady. But that surface-level impression was only half the truth. What her neighbors didn't know was that Alicia had lived a life most people could never even imagine. She had led FBI tactical teams into cartel compounds in South America. She had conducted raids on armed militias in the U.S. and coordinated high-stakes rescue operations overseas. She had trained elite agents in close-quarter combat, advanced weapons handling, and crisis negotiation. While others slept peacefully at night, Alicia had spent years facing some of the most dangerous criminals in the world and winning. And yet, in her neighborhood, she was simply the quiet lady down the street. That particular evening, Alicia was returning from another exhausting day at headquarters. She pulled her government-issued SUV into the driveway, cut the engine, and exhaled slowly. The weight of leadership, the endless meetings, the constant responsibility, it was a lot, even for her. She gathered her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and stepped out into the cool night air. Her mind was already shifting into home mode. Maybe a quick shower, maybe catching up on some reports, maybe a late dinner. She locked her car and began walking toward her townhouse, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. But just before she reached the sidewalk, everything changed. From the shadows near the hedges, a man stepped out suddenly. His posture was stiff, aggressive, and his eyes were filled with suspicion. He wore a faded neon vest with the word security across the chest. The kind you could buy online for $20. But what caught Alicia's attention wasn't the vest. It was the weapon in his hand. A handgun, pointed straight at her. "Stop right there!" he shouted, his voice uneven, half command, half nervous tremor. Alicia froze, not in fear but in calculation. Years of training surged to the surface. In a split second, she knew exactly what kind of danger she was facing. This wasn't a professional, this was someone unpredictable. And unpredictability was the most dangerous threat of all. "Stop right there!" the man barked. His words came out sharp, but the cracks in his voice betrayed him. He was nervous. His grip on the gun was unsteady, his hands trembling just enough for Alicia to notice. But while his voice wavered, the weapon in his hand was frighteningly real. This wasn't just an empty threat. This was a gun pointed at her head. The man wore a neon vest with security stamped across the chest. But nothing about him looked professional. His posture was sloppy, his eyes darted around nervously, and his finger rested far too close to the trigger. He wasn't trained. He wasn't prepared. He was dangerous, precisely, because he didn't know what he was doing. "You don't belong here!" he shouted, his tone dripping with suspicion. "Show me your ID or I'll call the cops." For a split second, Alicia froze, not from fear but from disbelief. She was standing in her own neighborhood, outside her own home, after years of serving her country, protecting strangers, and putting her life on the line for others, only to be treated like a criminal in the place she should feel safest. Her breathing stayed steady. Her FBI training told her one thing: stay calm, control the situation. Slowly, she raised her hands slightly, not in surrender, but in control. "This is my home," she said, her voice firm but calm. "Put the weapon down before you make the biggest mistake of your life." Her words carried authority, but the guard wasn't listening. Instead of lowering the gun, he took a step closer, his face twisted with hostility. "I said prove it!" he snapped. His voice cracked, but his prejudice filled the silence. "People like you don't live here." Those words cut deeper than the gun itself. This wasn't about security. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't even about safety. It was about something uglier. It was about prejudice. And in that moment, Alicia understood. This wasn't just some overzealous HOA guard doing his job. This was a man who saw her skin color, her presence, and immediately decided she didn't belong. But what he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the woman he was threatening wasn't powerless. She was one of the most highly trained tactical commanders in the country, and she wasn't about to be intimidated in her own neighborhood. Alicia's instincts sharpened in an instant. Years of FBI tactical training took over, and her mind moved faster than the man's trembling trigger finger ever could. She knew the truth. One wrong move, one wrong word, one slip of temper. This could end with a bullet. But Alicia Davis wasn't someone who panicked. She had stared down cartel leaders, negotiated with armed hostage-takers, and led raids under gunfire. Compared to those moments, this man in a cheap vest was nothing more than a dangerous nuisance. Her voice stayed calm, controlled, but layered with authority. "You're pointing a loaded weapon at a federal officer. You have 5 seconds to put it down." Her words sliced through the night air. But instead of listening, the guard let out a short, mocking laugh. "Yeah, right," he sneered. "What are you, a cop? You don't look like one." He smirked as if her calmness was weakness. His arrogance blinded him to the storm that was about to fall on his head. That was it. Alicia didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't waste time. She moved with precision, the kind of movement born from years of drills and real-world missions. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her bag. The guard stiffened, his gun twitching slightly as he prepared for a weapon. But Alicia wasn't reaching for a gun. In one smooth, commanding motion, she pulled out a leather case and flipped it open, her arm extending high so there was no mistaking what it was. The golden shield of the FBI glistened under the streetlight, impossible to ignore. Her voice thundered with authority, filling the entire street. "FBI Tactical Commander Davis, you are assaulting a federal agent. Drop your weapon now." The words hit like a hammer. The guard's face drained of color. His bravado vanished in an instant. The weight of what he had just done, the crime, the danger, the stupidity, crashed into him all at once. His hands began to shake uncontrollably, the barrel of his gun wobbling as fear overtook him. The confidence that fueled his threats only moments ago evaporated, replaced by sheer panic. His breathing quickened, his knees seemed to buckle. For the first time, he realized he wasn't in control. Reality had hit him like a brick wall. He wasn't intimidating a random woman. He was standing at gunpoint against the federal government itself, and he was seconds away from losing everything. By now, the shouting had broken the quiet night, and one by one, neighbors began stepping outside. Front doors cracked open, porch lights flicked on, and curtains shifted as people peeked from behind the glass. What started as whispers quickly turned into a ripple of murmurs across the street. "Wait, isn't that Alicia?" one neighbor whispered, clutching her phone. "She's FBI?" Another gasped, disbelief written on their face. "What is that guard even doing?" Someone muttered, already raising their phone to record. Within minutes, several neighbors had their cameras out, filming every second. Some were shocked, others outraged, and a few stood frozen in silence. What they were witnessing wasn't just an argument. It was the public unraveling of a man's false authority. The so-called security officer, realizing too late that he had lost control, began to panic. His earlier arrogance melted into desperation. His gun wavered, then dropped slowly to the ground, clattering against the pavement. His voice cracked as he tried to explain himself. I thought you were trespassing. I didn't know, please, I didn't know." But excuses couldn't erase what had already happened. Everyone had seen it. He had pulled a weapon on a woman who lived there. Worse, he had threatened someone who wasn't just a resident. She was a highly decorated federal officer. Alicia didn't shout. She didn't let anger dictate her actions. Instead, she remained calm, her composure so firm it commanded more authority than any weapon ever could. She slipped her phone from her pocket and dialed with steady hands. Her voice was crisp and professional as she spoke. "Yes, this is Commander Alicia Davis with the FBI. I have an armed individual impersonating security, threatening residents with a firearm. Send units immediately." The crowd of neighbors gasped again. There was no doubt now. She wasn't bluffing, she wasn't exaggerating. She was the real deal. The guard stood frozen, his face pale, his excuses tumbling over each other in a mess of panic. It was a mistake. I didn't mean, please don't." But no one was listening to him anymore. The entire neighborhood had turned their eyes to Alicia. In that moment, she wasn't just their quiet neighbor. She was the embodiment of control, authority, and justice, and they knew it. And as the distant wail of sirens began to grow closer, the so-called security guard realized his downfall was complete. Within minutes, the sharp flash of red and blue lights painted the street. The distant sirens grew louder until 2 squad cars screeched to a halt in front of the neighborhood. Real police officers spilled out, weapons drawn, moving swiftly to secure the scene. The so-called HOA security guard froze like a deer caught in headlights. His earlier bravado had completely vanished. With shaky hands raised in the air, he stammered incoherently as officers closed in. Within moments, he was disarmed, forced to the ground, and handcuffed. The metallic click of the cuffs echoed louder than his panicked excuses. Neighbors who had gathered on their porches whispered in disbelief. Some continued recording, capturing every second of his humiliation. The man who had strutted around with false authority was now being dragged away, powerless. As the investigation unfolded, the truth came spilling out. He wasn't licensed. He had no training. In fact, he wasn't even officially employed by the HOA. He had declared himself a volunteer security guard, patrolling the neighborhood with nothing but arrogance and prejudice guiding his actions. His weapon was real, his authority was fake, and his recklessness could have gotten someone killed. The officers documented everything, taking statements from the neighbors who had witnessed the ordeal. Many pointed to Alicia, explaining how calm she had remained under pressure, how she had de-escalated a situation that could have turned deadly. Their voices carried a mixture of guilt and admiration. They had underestimated her for so long, only to learn tonight who she truly was. Neighbors who once gave her nothing more than polite nods now looked at her in awe. This wasn't just the quiet woman who lived down the street. This was a tactical commander who had saved their community from disaster without ever firing a shot. One officer, after hearing the full account, turned to Alicia with genuine respect in his eyes. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you handled that better than most of us could have." Alicia didn't smile. She didn't boast. She simply gave a small nod, her words carrying the weight of experience. Training saves lives. Ego destroys them. The message hung heavy in the night air, sinking into everyone who heard it. And in that silence, it was clear the neighborhood would never look at Alicia or reckless men with false authority the same way again. News of the incident spread like wildfire. What began as a neighborhood confrontation quickly turned into a headline. Local media stations were the first to pick it up, reporting on the shocking story of a so-called HOA security guard who had drawn a gun on an innocent woman, only to discover she was a decorated FBI tactical commander. Within hours, the footage neighbors had recorded was circulating online. By the next morning, the story had gone viral across social media platforms. People were outraged. How could a woman in her own home, in her own community, be treated like a trespasser? And worse, how could someone with no authority, no training, and no credentials have been allowed to intimidate residents with a firearm? Comment sections filled with anger, frustration, and disbelief. But alongside the outrage, there was something else. Admiration. Thousands praised Alicia for the way she handled the situation. She hadn't escalated it. She hadn't lashed out in anger. She had used her training, her authority, and her composure to diffuse what could have easily turned into a tragedy. Her calmness became a symbol of strength, and her words, "Training saves lives, ego destroys them," spread just as fast as the story itself. The impact was immediate. The HOA, under pressure from both residents and the media, disbanded its so-called security program overnight. Community leaders held an emergency meeting and issued a public apology, admitting they had failed their residents by allowing an unqualified man to act as an enforcer. New policies were introduced. No one could ever serve in any security role without proper licensing, certification, and oversight. The reckless behavior of one man had forced a system-wide change. But the biggest shift wasn't just in policy, it was in people's hearts. The neighbors who had once underestimated Alicia now looked at her with respect and gratitude. They realized that true strength often hides in plain sight, behind quiet smiles and unassuming faces. They learned a lesson that would echo long after the sirens faded. Never judge someone by their appearance. Never assume authority where none exists. And never underestimate the quiet strength of those around you. In an interview later, Alicia summed it up perfectly. Respect is the foundation of safety. The moment you let bias control your judgment, you've already lost. That night, one arrogant man learned the hard way. Pointing a gun at the wrong person doesn't just backfire, it changes everything. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with others, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Your support helps us keep bringing you content that inspires and opens eyes. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.